one of Labor's flagship policies is scrapping negative gearing. And as you know, it's been met with plenty of criticism, not just from property investors, who Labor claims use it as a tax loophole, but also aspiring homeowners, economists, and the real estate industry. Now, I'm not sure if you're aware, but Labor's plan is to remove negative gearing on existing dwellings, whilst allowing it on brand new dwellings. Now, the idea is that by doing this, there'll be more homes, keeping supply high and forcing rent down. Except insiders say this is a much too simplistic view of how the property market works. Labor hasn't taken into consideration all the variables at play, and the impact of this policy is likely to be the complete reverse of what they claim. After all, it is authored by one Chris Bowen, who Labor is too scared to put in front of a camera at the moment. To tell us more, Peter O'Malley from Harris Partners joins me in the studio. He's been doing his homework on the policy. The good thing that I have been promised from you, the good thing about what you're about to tell us, is you've got to put this policy in context with the trend of the market now. That's all very important, isn't it?
Good afternoon, Chris. Yes, the lines that Labor are running at the moment to justify negative gearing are the same lines that they used in the 2016 election campaign when we were facing undersupply and a rising property market. Yeah. We now have the reverse in both instances, where we have oversupply in many parts of the country, and clearly the property market is falling and falling dramatically. Now, the property market is falling independently of these changes to negative gearing, and I say to people that a politician's code for affordable housing is lower prices. So when a politician says we want to remove negative gearing because it will create more affordable housing, that's lower prices. Now, if you can live with that, by all means vote for the policy, but certainly understand it before you do swing behind it.
And a lot of people are of the mindset now, and I know a lot of people who are in their late teens and maybe early 20s who started to work in a job, a lot of people have the mindset now that maybe I can't afford to own a house in my foreseeable future. But what I can do is, with the savings that I have and a friendly bank, I might be able to go out and buy little footholds in the real estate market and negative gear them to try and create some wealth for myself. Now, for those people, what Labor is pursuing here won't work.
No, it won't. And personally, that's how I got on the property ladder. I didn't buy a waterfront property in Sydney. I bought a little unit in Glenelg in Adelaide, and negative gearing helped me get on the property ladder using that.
And that's only going to happen more and more.
That's right. Now, under Labor's negative gearing policy, negative gearing will only apply to brand new dwellings.
Yep.
Now, first home buyers are given an incentive by the state government to buy brand new dwellings here in New South Wales. So what we see happening is that the policy that Labor are proposing will push the price up beyond reason of brand new dwellings, creating a price bubble. That's the first unintended consequence of Labor's policy, and it will actually make it harder for first home buyers to purchase their first home.
Yeah. Now, the other thing is that if they do have a property that they like to negative gear now, they cannot on-sell that new property to someone who wants to negative gear.
So you'll get the new car syndrome. On the day you sign the contract, the property will be worth less than you paid for it. That's another unintended consequence. Now, Labor are saying that the top end of town like the Liberal Party's policies, but I think it's the reverse. What you'll note the absence of in this debate is big developers are not coming out and being critical of Labor's negative gearing policy.
Why do you think that is?
Because they're going to benefit from it. Yeah, they're about to have a whole wave, tens of thousands of home buyers that were in the existing market channeled to them at the brand new market. So developers would be privately delighted at what is happening here.
Okay, what about the rental market? How will this impact the price of rentals?
We won't see a uniformed response across the country to Labor's negative gearing policy. So in a tightly held market that's anti-development, let me give you two examples, Hobart and, say, the eastern suburbs of Sydney. They're both largely anti-development markets. Therefore, as investors drop out of the market, investors will drop out of the market in two ways, Chris. They will sell out of the market eventually, or they won't buy in. And because the new development is not happening in tightly held markets, rents will shoot up dramatically too.
So all of these people that they want to help that is to make things more affordable, it'll be out of their reach.
Those that are saving for their first home will find it harder because they're actually paying more rent in the interim. Now, when we look at this globally, countries that don't have negative gearing in place in their property markets have higher rental markets.
Right, just repeat that for my listeners. It's a very important point.
Globally speaking, countries that don't offer property investors negative gearing have higher rental prices on a one-for-one basis.
Yeah.
Therefore, tenants will pay more in tightly held markets under Labor's negative gearing policy.
What's irritated me is that I think Labor has misread the demographics of all of this. They keep saying, property investors with these apartments and negative gearing, they're super rich people. They've got more money than they know what to do with. That is so untrue, the way I understand the demographics of the real estate market.
Correct. We see lots of rent rolls come up for sale in our business, and we've got a big rent roll. And I can tell you now that rent rolls are not made up of mega rich people that own 10 or 11 properties. It's usually one owner owning one property, and they're doing their very best to pay it back.
Yeah.
And they're doing it in the face of rising land tax, falling rents, rising costs. And this will be another reason why people won't want to jump into the property market, which will have a spillover effect in a negative way.
And negative gearing has been around a lot longer than what people probably imagine.
It's been around since the 30s, Chris. So this, if you were designing a perfect tax system from scratch, you may not use negative gearing. I accept that. But the reality is the tax system is built around negative gearing, and there's give and take right through the system. What Labor are proposing here is just to rip the policy out without any form of compensation to the existing market. And when you talk about markets like Ryde, which are oversupplied with dwellings at the moment, aside from the 20 to 25% drop in prices you've already seen, you're likely to see another 10 to 15% on this policy alone.
And look, politically, let's talk politically. I don't think it's an accident that Chris Bowen has been taken out of play in the third week of the election campaign. They've spoken very seldomly about their negative gearing policy, a lot less than what they were speaking about. And for those two reasons, I reckon they see what they've come up with here as very, very unpopular.
They're not prosecuting the case. And in fairness, the Liberal Party are not exposing the flaws well enough either.
No.
Which is why I've written the report.
Yeah. Okay, one last thing. If you go back to when they were last saying we should crack down on negative gearing and the conditions were different, there were arguments back then, under the context of the market then, that they should do such a thing.
There were short-term reasons as to why they should act. Long-term, it was never going to hold up at that point in time. You can't just remove negative gearing without fiddling with other parts of the tax system. So people in defending the policy have been saying to me, property investors are getting rich at the expense of the taxpayer. But what I say to those people is if you own a property for 15 or 20 years, initially you will get some benefit from the taxpayer, but over time you will pay council rates, which is a tax.
Yep.
You'll pay land tax, stamp duty on the way in. When you finally crack a profit,
capital gains
tax, income tax.
Yep.
So the property investor, and many property investors listening to this will agree, pay far more out in tax than any reprieve they gain.
It's a great explanation. I'm glad you were able to do that work for us on this, but thank you very much for coming in this afternoon.
My pleasure, Chris. Thank you.
From Harris Partners, Peter O'Malley. So there you go. These have all got to be out there. We've got to unpack all of this stuff, and you've got to think about it carefully before you commit, because this is probably the most crucial federal election this country has ever faced. It's 22 minutes after 1.